All right, so this is Infosec Decoded number 10, the Daylight Savings Time edition. And Irvin's here with the new proof of concept for the exchange bug.
So, of course, this bug that's running around that GitHub tried to squash, somebody made it so that anybody could execute it. It's now in the hands of script kiddies. So if it was dangerous already, it's even more dangerous now with people who don't know what they're doing, but they're just pushing buttons. Hooray.
Yep. Yeah, that's a different person than the one that put one up on GitHub that Microsoft took down.
Right. This is a different person.
Yep, I saw a couple of people try it and it actually works sometimes. So yeah, if I felt like putting up an Exchange server, we could be using it for homework, I guess, but I'm not motivated.
And a lot of the cloud providers don't let you run Exchange on the cloud.
Well, it's a mighty weird thing to do, really.
Yeah. But anyway, it's in the hands of anybody now.
Yep. So all the companies that are using old stuff are pretty hosed.
Yep.
And then Kaitlyn's got open source tools.
Yeah, open source tools. So this guy named Greg Stewart wrote this cool little article going over the pros and cons of open source software. And unfortunately, the pros are that, it's cost effective. But unfortunately, the con is that, it might not stick around. It's not reliable. You just shouldn't use it. And the most worrisome is, of course, the last one. Security is a major issue. Anyone can be hacked, and you really need to not use open source software. Wait a minute. Wait, hold on. Let me take a look at the URL for a second. Oh, wait a second. This was written by SolarWinds in 2019. SolarWinds wrote this article in 2019.
Oh, say their stuff will be more secure because it's not open source.
Yes.
Oh. Well, that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, the article is all about how bad and insecure open source software is, and it was written by SolarWinds 2 years ago.
That's awesome.
Candidate for sure.
Which I think this. I remember when in 2014 when the big open source vulnerability in OpenSSH came out. I had this discussion. I said, the fact is, neither of them is safe unless you know what you're doing. And you real like, is Windows better than Linux? And the answer is, well, it's not that simple. If you set it up right. But so I mean, they can either be fine, but in both cases, you got a lot of work to like actually keep track of whether it's a good setup and you really pull on all the patches and such.
Right. I mean, well, the biggest takeaway is that you should do whatever the opposite of Greg Stewart tells you to do in this article.
Well, I don't know. A stock clock is right twice a day.
I don't think they're necessarily right about security becoming a major issue with open source software. And it's like, and they use the analogy that using open source software for security is like eating from a dirty fork.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that one, but I do understand the supply chain issue, which I think is the point, is that all these weird random people everywhere are running code on your box now.
Well, I mean, that's true, but that's also the same with closed source software.
Well, no,
as we found out,
doing it, and you can like sue them, and you can decide you trust them because, but
But there's no real way to audit the code if it's closed source. So that's the difference, is that you can hide things much better if you inject your stuff into closed source software.
Yeah, I suppose, but how many people are actually auditing the code?
I mean, if you have it on GitHub, people just randomly, download your project, tinker with it. Like just this weekend, I was working on the Basilisk emulator. So I don't know if you know that CCDC is starting in 2 weeks.
Oh.
So we're getting all the red team tools ready. So I created a replacement for Explorer.exe called Finder.exe, which is Mac OS 7.
Oh, yeah. It runs on a PC?
That'll run on a PC, yes. I'm using the Basilisk emulator to replace Explorer.exe.
The Basilisk emulator?
Basilisk 2, yes. It emulates the 6800 series of chips that were used in the old Macintoshes.
Oh.
So I created a hard drive image with Mac OS 7, and then I packaged it all up, and I created a custom version of Basilisk to, replace Explorer. And because of that, I was going through their source code and making sure, just, and it wasn't like audited. I was just going through it and making changes, and things like that happen when you have it open source.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if it's closed source, no one is. It's just too much of a hassle to go through try to reverse engineer everything.
Yeah, that's the original GNU open source argument that everyone's going to customize their code. Yeah, you're part of the rare group of people that might actually do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. And Alan Wennersten, he's got the social isolation.
Yes, social isolation and community disconnection are not spurring conspiracy theories. This, according to the January 2021 American Perspectives Survey from the Survey Center on American Life, which is funded by the American Enterprise Institute.
So do you think that's more reliable than SolarWinds or what?
I guess this article is a bit of a downer compared to the SolarWinds article. It's true, but in the interests of better understanding the QAnon phenomenon, it is highly relevant to what's going on in American politics. And what this survey has found is that, unlike previous research, well-done research that's found that believers in conspiracy theories tend to be very socially isolated and cut off from family and communities, the current adherents to the QAnon conspiracy theory actually are better connected than the average person. It's really quite remarkable. And there's a lot to unpack in this write-up on the survey. But basically what was done in the survey was they polled people in January, at the end of January, so this was after the insurrection. They polled people about their participation in community events and organizations, such as religious affiliation, tending church, membership in groups such as knitting clubs, talking to neighbors even, socializing. And what they found is that people who do more of these activities actually are far more likely to believe in the deep state, for example.
Yeah.
So this survey did not ask if people believed in some of the wackier QAnon notions, like children are being sex trafficked and their blood is being harvested to collect adrenochrome that is then being used as a drug by Hollywood elites. Instead, it was more about deep state and was the election stolen. And it found that these people who are highly engaged in their communities are 16% more likely to believe that the deep state does in fact exist, and 14% more likely to believe that Antifa was responsible for the attack on the US Capitol. And so one of the conclusions of this survey is that religious identity has a huge part in predicting whether or not somebody believes in this stuff. In particular, white evangelical Protestants seem to be the most likely, most susceptible to the QAnon messaging about the deep state. But another interesting finding was that it's not simply one's membership in a particular church or community organization. It also has to do with one's social circles. So those people who live highly politically segregated lives with minimal interaction with people with different political views are again far more likely to believe in the QAnon stuff. It seems that QAnon ideology, at least as far as concerns the deep state, is no longer a fringe conspiracy theory. It's crossed over to the mainstream. If you have a certain critical mass of people who believe it, it's no longer a fringe conspiracy theory. It's mainstream political thought. Even if it is totally fictional and delusional, it's no longer fringe. And I think that's where we've arrived at this point, is now that QAnon, or at least some elements of QAnon, are so widely embraced by the Republican Party. And let's not get this confused. It is figures in the Republican Party who have appeared in the media repeatedly espousing these things.
Yeah.
that now there is a significant number of Republicans and people who are simply engaged as socially who believe this stuff. That's where we are.
Yeah, that's what I thought. This stuff has moved from the fringe to the mainstream. And the fact that it's totally false doesn't matter at all. And, but that's nothing new, really. I mean, I was just listening to a speech from Angela Davis today, you know, back in the 60s, they were convinced that there were all, and the 50s, all these communist deep state moles hiding everywhere, which was just not true. It's actually quite common that a whole political movement is based on complete lies. It's happened several times before, but it does make me wonder if we're headed to really splitting into two nations. I mean, if we don't, and now we've got Fox News, Tucker Carlson is the latest pushing of white supremacy. We've got a very large, strong movement of people that believe all this total lies, and they seem to be growing momentum. So,
Yeah, I would say that the difference now is that this QAnon nonsense originated on 8chan.
yeah.
So the very bowels of the internet, now we have a mainstream political thought. And that was not the case even during the Red Scare of the 1950s. At least in that case, bad as that was, at least you had major political figures who generated that paranoia and were trying to capitalize on it. Whereas now it's some random person who may or may not be the owner of a disreputable online forum.
Yep. I'm distracted by my theatrical problems here. Anyway. Yeah, well, I don't see the cure. That's the problem. I mean, I see some people saying that Republicans can't win if they keep on focusing on nothing but bigoted white men and alienating others. But now with this hundreds of voter suppression laws coming through, they may be able to continue to become minority representation and just block the rest of the people from the ballot box. So I think everything depends on the next 2 years. I mean, if the Republicans take back the House and the Senate in 2022, then I think this voter suppression stuff will continue, and the Republicans may well take back the all three branches in 2024, and then we'll descend further into this madness.
If that happens.
Well, that's why I think if Biden doesn't remove the filibuster, then it will happen because they won't accomplish anything. So I mean, we're going to see. Anyway, I've got another quantum mechanics one. I'm very interested in this because it helps me understand something I wondered about for my whole life, pretty much. Einstein invented relativity by just thinking about riding a train and listening to bells chiming and how different observers would see different things. And a person who's driving towards a clock will see the interval of time between the minutes shorter because they move closer to the clock in that time. A person moving away will see time slow down. So he figured all that stuff out from that kind of experiment. And the fundamental thing that made it possible to do that is he said causality must always be preserved. If event A causes event B, like a hammer hits a glass and that breaks the glass, then the first event is causing the second event, and all observers everywhere must agree in the order of causality. And that seemed like an inalienable, obvious thing that you could base your theory on. But the problem is people can't figure out how to make quantum gravity because quantum mechanics is completely different. It's based on saying, in a sort of philosophical sense, that you can only predict things that are measured, and measurement matters. And what's going on when you're not looking is not anything in the realm of physics. That's just airy, ethereal stuff that doesn't matter. Anyway, this guy has now decided to combine the two in a very smart way. And he's developed this concept of a fundamental element of causation. And they actually have made experimental objects with light where causality reverses. So this suggests, which in retrospect should have been obvious, that Einstein assuming that time is just out there and time is just fixed like Newtonian is foolish. And we should say, just like solid objects and things having a location when you're not looking at them are just approximations that apply only at a human scale, the same thing is true of cause and effect. And cause and effect is not absolute. And it is just a limiting case at the larger scale. So this is early days of this, but this would help explain quantum gravity. And I'm very attracted to it because this is the part of quantum mechanics that struck me as a real revelation. When you think about what you really know, and all you really know is the result of experiments, you don't really know what happens behind you when you're not looking, and you don't need to know. And it's not, anyway, it's a more disciplined way of thinking. And it's the first smart idea I've come across like this in decades at really getting to the fundamental problem between relativity and quantum mechanics, which both seem to be very true in their field, but bringing the two together has been almost impossible. It's been the struggle of theoretical physicists for a long time. So anyway.
So the experiment you're talking about, is that the delayed light experiment where you have the beam splitters set up in such a way that you split the beam so that it goes through this double slit, and then the other beam goes through the detector later?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so that's been around for a while.
Yes, it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
But it's like most of the things in quantum mechanics, the issue is the interpretation of it. And they're trying to figure out, anyway, it does point out that this fundamental thing, which I thought of as an absolute of causality that must be preserved, there's no reason to accept that.
Yeah, no, of course not. One of my favorite general relativity thought experiments is the train through a farmhouse thought experiment, where what you do is if you look at something going fast, the length contracts, right? You may have heard that in your science classes, but that's exactly what happens. So if you have a long train and it starts going near the speed of light, to you, the observer that's stationary, it looks like the train is compressing lengthwise. And you can compress it so much that it'll fit inside a little, like a little farmhouse, right? Or like a little, like inside a little farm. And so what you can do is you can prove to someone that it now fits inside the little farmhouse by closing both doors at the same time with like laser speed, doors, and then open them back up again so the train can then pass through. And from your perspective, that's exactly what happens. You send out these signals, they go out, they close the doors, the train's now shrunk and inside the building, and then you open it up again, and then the train goes out the other side. And the idea, the thought experiment is like, how is this even possible? Because from the train's perspective, it's the house, it's the little farmhouse that's shrinking, right? Because the farmhouse is moving towards the train near the speed of light. So how is that train, even from the perspective of someone on the train, how is the train able to fit inside the little farmhouse at all? And of course, the idea is that events in general relativity are not are relative. So cause and effect necessarily isn't, but the idea of like simultaneous events don't necessarily happen at to one observer, don't necessarily happen to like another observer, depending on their frame of reference. So.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in original relativity, cause and effect is always preserved, and the order of events is preserved. But that may not be true.
At least in this case, the order of events is not preserved, in that the case that from the person on the ground, the doors going down happens at the same time. But from someone on the train's perspective, the far door goes down, then up, the train passes through, and then the back door goes down and up.
Right.
And that's how the paradox is resolved, is through the fact that the events actually happen in different orders.
There's one in the gravitation book by Wheeler that I spent time with, where you have a ruler sliding across a table with a hole in the table that's too small. But if the ruler is going fast enough, it shrinks so it falls through the hole. And that one, the solution is that the rigidity of it is also relative and changes. But anyway, this stuff is really very interesting, and it has a lot of real world consequences. Anyway, so then we got women targeted by deepfakes. Well, yeah, I would have guessed that, actually.
Yeah, well, I would have guessed, my guess would have been that it was all politicians targeted by deepfakes, but I thought that this was I would have been wrong in that. And I thought that it was interesting um, that the analysis in this article pointed out that that it is in use in politics, and it's growing. That application is growing. However, the vast majority, 96% of them were non-consensual sexual deepfakes, and 99% of those were made of women. So typically, this is used to create sexual videos of women without their consent, whether that's for revenge porn or other purposes.
Yeah, that's what I would figure. The first application of any technology tends to be sexual, it seems.
Yeah, and it's pretty sad the things that some people are doing with these, but it's interesting because it's sort of an emerging area of security research and also government policy as we look at ways to handle this and mitigate some of the risks that come along with this this technology.
Yeah, the deepfake politics have not really caught on as much as I expected yet, but I'm sure they're coming.
Yeah, not yet, but I agree. I think that that's going to become more and more common as time goes by, especially because even if something, as we're seeing more and more, even if something can be proven false, there's always going to be some subset of the population that's never going to listen to or believe that proof. So,
well, in a way, I'd say Trump and the Republicans have shown that you don't even need deep fakes. You can just say something absolutely blatantly false, and a bunch of people will just buy it anyway. So, who needs your technology?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's the social engineering part of security. I mean, fooling people is nothing new. And it's a real art. And some people really have it, the ability to just trick people into believing nonsense. And it's not a technological accomplishment. It's a psychological, emotional accomplishment.
Yes.
Anyway, so Irvin, Google is tracking you even in incognito mode.
Yeah, there is a lawsuit, and Google tried to shut it down, but a judge said, nope, it is perfectly fine for it to go through. The lawsuit seeks at least $5 billion with a B, because Google keeps tracking you even if you are in incognito mode. Which, I mean, that's not necessarily surprising because it's Google. But yeah, Google's gonna fight it. But this is gonna be interesting to watch.
I'm surprised it went this far because it sounds ridiculous. I mean, Google never claimed incognito mode meant that nobody could track you. And how could anybody claim you had $5 billion of damages from that?
Who knows? But that's something that I want to see.
Yeah. This is a very common question students ask me. How much does incognito mode protect you? And I said, well, I don't really know, but I wouldn't think very much because it doesn't hide your IP address. And Google's tracking that.
Mm-hmm.
All it means is it doesn't store cookies.
Right. But all your DNS traffic is still visible. All your whatever you're doing is still, you still can see it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want privacy, something like Tor or a VPN would do a lot more for you.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, and so here's more deep fakes.
More deep fakes by an unsuspecting criminal. So the Pennsylvania Live Patriot News website, it actually does look legit though, has this article posted March 12, 2021 by Jana Ben Koster about a Pennsylvania woman who created this deep fake videos to essentially force the rivals of her daughter off the cheerleading squad. And it's like, what is going on? So the woman is 50 years old. Her name is Rafaela Bowne, and she was actually charged with 2 misdemeanors. first you created these doctored images of these teenagers and spread them online, and then also told these teenagers online to go kill themselves. Isn't this a wonderful mother? I know this is and it's all for some ridiculous cheerleading nonsense that no one cares about. But yeah, so Sam, you're talking about political ramifications of these deep fakes. We're going to see it soon. Well, we're seeing it more in the crazy personal politics so far. So
well, this
it's happening.
There were two similar cases before. There's the woman who arranged for someone to break her daughter's rival's legs because they were competing in ice skating. And then there was the woman who didn't like the girlfriend of her son, so she made a fake persona and seduced this woman and convinced the kid, compelled the kid to actually commit suicide. And then when they tried to charge her with something, I think they weren't really able to charge her with much. And this woman only got 2 misdemeanors.
Yep.
It's not exactly clear what crime you're committing. It's certainly not murder or anything. It's something pretty minor, like harassment.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely harassment. Telling kids to kill themselves definitely is a form of harassment. But
you would think it would be more serious than that. But the problem is, I think the First Amendment.
Well, the First Amendment, and also I think, I mean, the First Amendment doesn't apply to harassment cases and stuff like that, so that's not really an issue. But the other issue is a lot of times our justice system just really isn't equipped for these kinds of things. And also we also have a justice system that devalues, kid stuff, right? Like bullying. Like when kids hit each other, we call it bullying. And when adults hit each other, we call it assault, right? And we just treat it differently.
I also think driving someone to suicide is not murder because, they say, well, it was their choice and you didn't really shoot them with a gun or something. You can't prove that you were the cause.
But it's the same. You have the same sort of legal liability, I believe, as saying or yelling fire in a crowded theater, right? Like you're not directly responsible, but you knew what you were doing.
Well, this is all coming up with the Trump insurrection case. This is what they're saying. It's not going to be that easy to convict, say, Trump of being responsible since he didn't personally go in and kick in the doors. He just said something and then other people did it. That's not really cause and effect in the law. That's hard to prove.
It is hard to prove. Law is hard. In this case, though, it's pretty cut and dry. But
all she got was a couple of misdemeanors, so a slap on the wrist. Yeah. And Alan's got, they're failing to sanitize PDF files again?
Yes, once again. This is a paper from the French National Institute for Research in Computer Science and Automation. They analyzed nearly 40,000 PDF files from 75 security agencies from 47 different countries. And they found that in over 3/4 of the files, there was some kind of metadata embedded in those PDFs that was sensitive. Information such as the name of the author, the operating system on which the PDF was created, details about the device on which it was created, the author's email, and the file path information for that PDF.
Well, sure,
so
but is that really sensitive? I mean, that doesn't sound all that sensitive to me.
Well, granted, some of these items probably are not terribly sensitive, but if you can combine some of this information, such as the author email and the operating system and the name of the PDF app, you could, if you are, say, a rival intelligence agency, craft some kind of phishing email with some malware tailored to that particular user's machine. And it turns out that some of these security agencies or at least the users of these computers, that security agencies are not updating their software and their operating systems. And they found this. Some of these PDFs were authored on systems that are years out of date, have not been patched in years. So ripe pickings for a rival security agencies, one would think. And it's probably already being exploited.
Well, yeah, that's not a surprise. I remember when I went to New Zealand, I was horrified to be buying airplane tickets from machines running Windows NT 3.5.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people are using old vulnerable crap.
Yeah, and that's to be given. That's a given in the airline industry, but in the security intelligence world, you'd think they'd be a little smarter about it. But turns
Well, I
out, no, they're
I
just
would.
as bad.
I mean, years ago, the military came up with the rules, and then they did audits, and they've been like 95% out of compliance forever.
Right, right. And it's not just the military, it's all of the US government.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
it costs a lot of money to upgrade all your stuff. There's never money for that.
No. And of course, it's expensive to hire the people who know what they're doing to fix these problems, and they're not willing to do that. So,
Yeah, well, I think that's these big mega hacks we've been having are just, you know, revealing that the emperor has no clothes, where all our important functions are running on these old vulnerable systems by people that really are turning on TeamViewer and using the default password and stupid things like that.
yeah, yeah.
But if anybody had an illusion that something else was happening, they might as well get over it.
Yes.
And then that's the point of this one here. So this is pretty surprising. So FireEye has a report where they say China is usually pretty careful with their nation state hacking. But in this Microsoft hack, when they hacked Exchange, China, it makes you wonder what's going on inside China. It's nation state hackers. And usually they're careful in what they do, but now they hit thousands of companies, and they just dropped web shells on the companies. And the second article from Dan Gooden surprised me from Ars Technica, saying that the Chinese hackers just put web shells on all these servers, and they're just running there apparently with no password. So anybody that just finds the URL can just take over the servers. So now random other people are going up by hand and putting ransomware on the servers. So, I mean, you would think you would at least put a password on your web shell, which is not that hard to do, so other people can't use your web shell, but apparently they haven't done that. So it makes me wonder if these people are really Chinese nation state attackers, or if they're just criminal gangs, because they're so sloppy. They're doing so much extra collateral damage here. It's not like a precision military act at all. It's just sort of like when an anonymous hacked Sony, just a bunch of random people just making mess. But anyway, it's all spreading like crazy. They say if you're running Exchange, you've probably already been hacked if your stuff is not updated. Now everybody and their brother can get in, since the POC is public. But even before that, apparently the Chinese were just sloppily letting everybody in. And it's another part of the world that I think surprises a lot of my students. Not only is stuff much less secure than you think, but the nation states are just openly hacking everybody. China's just absolutely doing it wide out in the open. Everybody knows they're doing it. And when you ask the government, they say, we never hack anybody. So it's just ridiculous. Everybody knows who's doing it, and there's currently no repercussions. So anyway, it's really the lawless Wild West out there. Anyway, so Republican men don't want to take the vaccine. I've been hearing about this. This is Liz, I think. Yeah. I think you're on mute, Liz.
Yes. So this one is probably not news to a lot of folks. Shocker. There are Fox News is steering folks, is not encouraging folks to get vaccinated for the coronavirus.
But Trump took it, and Trump even told other people to took it.
That's what surprised me. I thought once their fearless leader owned up to it, I mean, he got it before he even left the White House, but concealed that fact because he thought it might lose him cool points with his tribe. So he neglected to mention that for at least a couple of months after he'd gotten it.
But he did say it at CPAC.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would have thought that that would have been enough to turn the tide. And I mean, I know a lot of Republicans that are getting it. So I know this isn't a universal, this certainly isn't a universal collectively held belief, but folks still see it as a But folks still see it as an issue that they're being told to get this vaccine. So that in and of itself makes people not want to get the vaccine. We're told not to run out into traffic too, but I don't see people running out into traffic because they're being told not to run into traffic and they need to assert their rights and freedom. So I'm missing some logic here.
It is a real issue of social engineering. I mean, our nation is splitting, and it is very difficult to understand why.
It's interesting in this article. They've done a
Alan's got helicopter running again. Well, go ahead. Yeah.
they had done a survey, and it was interesting to me that there was a comparison between respondents in December and March, and there was a much greater number of Republican men in March who were refusing to take the vaccine in March versus in December, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I know they're starting to try to have like some celebrities and ex-presidents and stuff take it to try to convince people, and that's not having much effect, I suspect.
And part of it, I can understand some of the the underlying reason for this that makes the most sense to me is that the government just continually lies to people, and I think that's true. I mean, one dire mistake we made early on in this was when the messaging was that masks don't help, and the reason that was told was because they didn't want there to be a run on masks, so first responders and frontline medical care workers wouldn't be able to get PPE. Well, they weren't able to get PPE anyway, and lying to people like that has caused grave and lasting mistrust. So I think if there's one lesson to be learned there, it's that in situations like this, people can handle the truth, and we need to be honest with them, because if we lie, then then people feel like they can't trust anything that comes after that.
Absolutely. And I was very upset when I saw the pressure on the CDC and Trump's political hacks rewriting the medical advice. I didn't want to take the vaccine at that point. That sounded pretty scary.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see what comes of it all. I'm taking the vaccine. I got my first shot. It hasn't killed me yet. And so Netgear appears to be junk.
Yes, Netgear appears to be junk. And the reason why I put this one is because I've been realizing just more and more how junky, because I have a Netgear access point. It's actually a router, but I use it as strictly an access point, and it has that setting, and finding things like it's pinging Netgear often. It's connecting to Amazon for no apparent reason. Like, it's doing these weird things. So I am not at all surprised when I saw this, that, there's a bunch of, I think there's 15 CVEs listed for Netgear ProSafe. I am not at all surprised, and I'm already looking around to switch my access point, because that is ridiculous.
Well, I don't know if the others are any better. In a way, these are getting patched.
In a way, but it's just amazing how noisy those things are.
And another issue is that these are just ubiquitous. I mean, I have seen these, and I've seen these everywhere.
Yeah, and I know Cisco got caught like 8 times in the last year putting default hidden passwords on the device. I think this came out like 8 years ago. DEF CON had a contest hacking home routers and small business routers, and they're all like this.
There was an article in the Register. I want to say it was Friday, or it was over the weekend, and there were, I believe it was the same switch. There were 15 vulns just in that one switch.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, well, I think they just people haven't tested them, and when you test them, this is the whole Internet of Things. It's a little bit hard to extract the firmware, and when you do, you see something awful. So a smart textile. I thought this was a lot of fun.
This is fun. So the Fudan University, and I think Fudan's near Shanghai, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so Fudan has developed some new textiles that light up. Oh, it'll be so much fun. So apparently this is sort of like electroluminescent wire, except that it's more in the shape of a thread. And you can weave it into things. You can make cool logos. You can have like a patch that like glows, if you're into that. And I certainly am. I'm very into that.
But can you connect it to like a microcontroller and have like scrolling messages go by and stuff?
You absolutely can. They actually demonstrated that. They had it print text.
Yeah.
So you can use it as a screen, although I don't think it makes a very good screen because obviously it's fabric. It's going to warp and bend, but you can technically, you can make backpacks that like light up and have, your Twitter feed show up. I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff you could do with this. And this is really gonna spur forward the smart wearables clothing that's been talked about for years and years now. So this is some good fun stuff. And other than that, I have nothing else to say about it. Go fighting Fudons.
Okay. Yeah. 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 It sounds good. I bet it won't hold up too long, but
Oh, that's the other thing. It is machine washable. It will. It
Machine
apparently
washable?
is. Yes, it apparently is. Will hold up. Now the batteries. I'm not sure how they're going to connect the batteries and stuff
yeah.
because the batteries aren't going to be. But the threads themselves that light up are machine washable. They do hold up, and this can be used for sort of mainstream applications.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Except I guess there won't be any chips for it. Alan's got
Yes, this is yet another story on the global shortage of computer chips. Taiwan is facing a drought, and Taiwan happens to be the home of some of the biggest fabs for silicon in the world, TSMC and UMC. They've already got a huge backlog. A number of different industries, such as car manufacturing to PlayStation 5 game consoles, are backlogged or shut down altogether because they simply cannot get the chips that they need. And it's about to get worse because Taiwan is in the midst of the worst drought in over 50 years. And this matters because chip manufacturing is extremely water intensive. TSMC in its 3 facilities in Taiwan consumes over 40 million gallons of water per day of operations. And they can't recycle all that water. They have to get fresh water. And since the government is mandating a lower consumption of water, that means that they're going to have trouble completing the orders that they have already, to say nothing of all the additional orders that they've got. So this is going to make the shortage even more severe. And until Taiwan gets more water, it's going to be a little while before this situation is resolved.
I wonder if they're
Good news.
doing clean manufacturing or if they're polluting the water, because Silicon Valley is a Superfund site because they polluted the water like crazy making chips.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. It is concerning. Hopefully they're just discharging it into the ocean.
Oh, well, that's one way. But I mean, I was hoping they might actually like clean the junk out of the water somehow, but I guess that would be asking too much.
Well, TSMC does brag about their water recycling efforts and how it's so much better than even they had hoped, but they're still consuming an incredible amount of water. And there's just no getting around the fact that
there it got better. Okay.
it's just a very water intensive manufacturing process. But the good news is that TSMC is going to be opening a gigafactory in the US, and it's projected to open in 2024. So at least they'll have more production sites. And they've got 11,000 acres in the most water secure city in America, which happens to be Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah. That's where they did it before. Hopefully they won't pollute it as much this time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. And I guess, all right. And then I thought this was interesting, talking about the security of serverless stuff. It's relatively new. And this is the idea that you run an application and the system spins up a little virtual machine to run your app on, and you don't know that. And it shares that virtual machine with other people, of course, to conserve resources. So you tell it, I'm listen on the network, and if someone makes a request, then give them this response. But you don't tell it what operating system to run or what web server to use. It makes that decision and just spins up a serverless little process. It's running on a server, but you don't have to know anything about the server. And what it's actually doing is spinning these up as needed to service the requests and using the same one for multiple users and so you're sharing data with God knows who, and they're talking about the various levels of isolation that are available and the consequences if somebody escapes the container. So it's good to begin understanding this. There were virtual machines, and then there were containers that are even less isolated from the host, and these things are even less isolated from the host and other users, all in the interest of making them faster and easier to deploy. So I remember this serverless stuff started with Azure. Azure had these things, and they announced them, and they said, we will not even tell you what nation your data is in. And then people started complaining, and they had a higher end that would at least keep your data somewhere in the United States. But this is part of the whole concern everyone's had about cloud computing. You don't even know where your stuff is, where it's running, where it's going. But so it's good to begin understanding the security layers here. And that's a very high level description, but I'm glad to see people starting to write this up and we can all begin understanding it. But now I understand better. When I did a lab where you did this, the first thing you have to do is create an identity and an identity and authentication module before you can run your serverless thing. And I didn't know why. And now I know why a little bit better. You have to specify who you are, and then you'll run it on this little container with some kind of identity which separates you from the other users of that container. Anyway, and the last one here is Elizabeth with a guy suing a rental car company.
Yes, this story's pretty wild. So it kind of blew my mind. Essentially what happened, this poor man was convicted of murder and ended up spending almost 5 years in prison. And he had, when he was going through his murder trial all the way back in 2016, he had, well, let me back up. So he was recently exonerated after spending almost 5 years in prison. And he was exonerated based on the fact that Hertz rental car company provided a receipt that showed that the guy was renting a car minutes before the murder took place and was unable to have committed the murder because this was a pretty incontrovertible alibi. And these documents weren't shared with the court until 2018, and they had been initially subpoenaed back in 2016 when the original murder trial was taking place. And even more mind-boggling to me is that number one, there don't seem to, this article didn't mention any sanctions against the company. Usually, you're compelled to comply with subpoenas, particularly, I would think, in a murder trial case. Second of all, it amazed me that he's only seeking, said in excess of $25,000, but I don't think very much in excess of $25,000, which is a pittance. That's like $5,000 a year of unjust incarceration, and they ought to pay more if they can't get it together. There ought to be some kind of sanction here. And also, I mean, this poor guy lost 5 years of his life, and who knows what else due to this wrongful conviction. So,
yeah, but I would say the company probably didn't break the law. They asked him in 2016 to find records in 2011, and they said, we can't find them. That's legal. You're allowed to not have your old records. And then they found them later. But, I don't think they broke the law. You can say they have inefficient record keeping. But I mean, if I ask for a receipt 5 years later, the company is under no legal obligation to have it.
Apparently not. Apparently not. So
Yeah, I mean, I think all they have to do is make like make a good faith effort to find it, and then say they lost it. So I mean, I don't know if he's going to win in court. It is a shame, but I'm not sure the rental car company is actually the bad guy here.
maybe so.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Anyway, I guess that's it for this one. And what is it, Monday? We'll be back on Friday. Thanks, folks. Where's my button? There it is.